all want to make money by doing something we love. If you could turn your hobby into your job, you'd never work a day in your life, right? Welcome to Hobby Hustle, the ultimate podcast where collecting passion and business collide. Now, here's your host, Zach Nygett.
Welcome to episode 2 of Hobby Hustle. I'm your host, Zach Nygett, and I appreciate you taking the time to watch. And I hope that you're going to enjoy our discussion today. Today's guest is a well-established content creator in the collectible space, specializing in a variety of non-sports items. His collecting interests range from trading cards, pop culture, wrestling, Star Wars, comics, original artwork, toys, and other non-sports items. In addition to being a passionate collector, he is the host of Between Two Slabs podcast, and also recently launched a new trading card production company called Saturday Morning Cards. When he's not focused on collectibles, he's also a successful entrepreneur. You can find him on social media at the.great.curator, as well as at Saturday Morning Cards. I'm honored to welcome a friend, a collecting expert, and the self-proclaimed hardest working man in the hobby, Dan Nguyen, aka the Great Curator. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Wow, what an intro. Oh, it got me all hyped up for this. Yes.
Nice,
thank you for having me.
Yeah, we want you to be hyped up, man. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. I get to do a podcast, talk about the hobby, and then I get to do all my other regular stuff. So today's going to be a good day.
Dude, that's awesome. That's what it's all about, right? Doing something you love and making that able to work for you, which is really cool. So, hey, your handle, The Great Curator, is pretty unique. How did you come up with that name and sort of like tell us a little bit about the story behind The Great Curator?
Oh, okay. Yeah. It just kind of came to me one day. You know, a lot of people will criticize me or make fun of me saying, oh, he thinks he's the greatest in the hobby. But what they don't realize is The Great Curator is actually a pop culture reference, a very obscure one. But if you know your sci-fi, then you know this reference. But there's a long-standing British television show called Doctor Who. It's been going on for like decades, like since the 1960s. And I started watching it like 10, 15 years ago. And one of the episodes, it was like an anniversary episode where the character, he calls himself the Doctor. He basically he's like a superhero that travels time and space and solves mystery murders and things like that. And he just fought a big battle, right? And then he's sitting in a museum and he's like, oh man, I need to retire. I need to get out of this game. This is too much. I'm too old for this. And he starts looking around the museum and he's like, you know what? I should work in this museum. I should be the curator of this museum. I could be the Great Curator. And it's a great scene. You can see it on YouTube. Iconic scene from that episode. And that always stuck in my head. I remember watching it and I was like, wow, that's such a cool name. You know, I should call myself that someday. And then when it came time, when I was in the hobby making social media content and I had to start an Instagram and I had to like find an Instagram handle, that was the first thing that just popped up in my head. I put it out there and then it just kind of stuck to me and people really like it. But yeah, that's the origins of it. It has nothing to do with me thinking I'm the greatest, but it just kind of worked out that way.
Well, that's awesome. Well, maybe there's some inspiration there, right? You can go post that clip now on social and do your origin story or something with it. That'd be cool. Nice. That's awesome. So speaking of origins, let's start at the beginning. I'm curious on your collecting journey, because I know you're passionate about a lot of things, but what are sort of your first memories about collecting and like what got you started? And is there like a specific item that still sticks in your head about like this was the, ultimate grail for you as a kid?
Ultimate grail? Okay, that's going to be hard, but I can tell you this. I feel like I was born a collector. I tell people, I jokingly say I've been collecting since I was in the womb. I get it from my mom, really, because my mom was an avid like antique collector, just like typical old people things. They would just like collect. They would go to antique flea markets and buy antique furniture and decor pieces and things like that. And ever since I was little, I remember going to flea markets with my mom while she's walking around looking for stuff. I was looking for toys. Toys is my number one passion. I've been a toy collector ever since I was a little kid. I have many of my childhood toys still to this day. I was like such a nerd back in the day that I was like a 12, 13-year-old kid, and I was bagging up all my G.I. Joes in individual bags with their weapons and cataloging, all their accessories and everything like that. I was like taking care of things all the way back then. And I still have a lot of my childhood toys to this day, but that was my first item that I really collected. I've always been a toy collector my whole life. And then from that, it kind of grew into trading cards, comic books, and all sorts of things. And just like a lot of people in the hobby, I've come and go over the years as you go to school, you go to college, you get a job, you start a family and all this stuff, right? I come and go in and out of the hobby for many years, but toys have always kind of been like a mainstay passion of mine. And then through toys, I kind of branched off into the other things, which I'm sure, I think you have a question about that. We can definitely talk about how I got into the hobby, but it all stems from ever since I was a little kid, as far as I can remember, me just collecting toys, and then just me getting the collecting passion from my mom.
That's awesome. Maybe there's a common thread there, because my parents were big antiquers also, and I've been to plenty of antique shops. So like you said, maybe that's part of the collective DNA, right? Yeah. From an early age, starting to appreciate lots of things, right? Lots of things. That's cool. That's awesome. Well, I've followed you for quite some time, and you mentioned that, you started on YouTube and Instagram and all these things, and your sort of content and attitude has changed over that. I'm curious about, from a collection perspective, how has your approach evolved, over the years?
It's definitely evolved, I would say. I just feel like right now I'm very, very comfortable in my lane of what things that I go after. I really know the things that I want, or the things that excite me. But in the beginning, I would say for me, I got into the hobby just because I was curious about how really it expanded into a marketplace in terms of like things were valuable. I remember back in like 2018, I went in to Target and I bought a box of wrestling cards that was on discount. Believe it or not, the blaster boxes were on discount. It was like a $20 box, discounted down to like $5. And I bought the box, and it's the first time I bought cards in like probably 15 years. And I was like, and in my mind, I was opening the cards and I was just like messing around with them. I was throwing them, in the trash or against the wall, just like, oh, I don't like this guy. I threw it against the wall. Oh, I love this guy. I'll keep him, right? And I was just thinking to myself, I remember very distinctly thinking to myself, cards are worthless, right? They're just, I spent $5. It was a waste of money. Regardless, I didn't even look at the autographs or anything like that, right? But then in 2020, 21, the market's evolving. Suddenly this stuff is worth money, right? And that's what really kind of piqued my interest to do a lot of research. And that's when I got back into the hobby. And just like everybody else, when you first get back into the hobby, you rely on a lot of content to educate yourself. And that content at that time was pushing like, these are your top 10 cards or comic books or toys or whatever, right? That you should buy as an investment. So I would, in the beginning, when I got back in, I would chase the things that people were saying, these are the good things, right? Like I was letting people make my shopping list for me, essentially. And then as I start to educate myself more, I started making some decisions for myself about like, what do I want to go after, right? But at that time, because the hobby was so hot, it was mainly motivated by like financial reasons, right? Oh, I think I can make money on this item, right? So I was, a lot of people forget this, but originally I got back through sports cards. That was like my thing. If you look at my earlier videos, I talked about sports cards. Yeah. So I started buying cards for the financial aspect of it because I thought I could make money off of it. And then as the market got really increasingly volatile, I started to think to myself, do I really want to be like doing this, like chasing money and putting myself at risk? So then I started moving towards like things that I enjoyed, but also things that I think I could make money on. And then from that, I found some success, but then I kind of narrowed it down to more rare items that I like, that I think I can make money on, but they're also rare. And now I'm at a point where I'm just buying things that I know I love, or that will kind of bring me some type of enjoyment. But I'm so confident in my ability and my knowledge in the collectible space that I know that whatever I buy, it's probably going to be worth money at some point. So, I'm just very comfortable where I am in the space right now, where, I'm not like chasing things. I don't have FOMO, and I'm just buying things that I know I love, that I also know will fit perfectly into my long-term investment portfolio.
That's awesome. That's actually really interesting that you bring that up. And I'm curious, can you talk a little bit about sort of how do you identify what are those things that you think have that upside, right? Like you said, you went from financially driven into more passion driven, and what you think will, be there for the long term. So Tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. I've kind of thought about this. Like, I thought about like publishing a paper on this at some point, like my checklist of characteristics in a collectible that will make it a home run collectible for anybody, right? But I don't know if I want to give away all my secrets here just yet, guys. You have to stay tuned towards the end. Maybe I'll sprinkle it throughout this episode, so you guys have to listen to the whole thing. But what I think is basically, it's for me, because I love pop culture collectibles. I look for things that are nostalgic to my generation. I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and our generation currently, if you grew up in that time, this is our time where we have disposable income, where we have money, and we're chasing things from our childhood. So I look for things that are nostalgic. I look for things that are rare, where they're not easily accessible. Like, can somebody just go on eBay and buy the same thing right now, or can they order it on a website or something like that? So I look for rarity, and then I look for just things that I think are unique enough where there's a story to be told, or a story that's associated with that item that adds value. So one thing that I've kind of like, I always go back and forth in my own head about this. I think to myself, why do people buy these cards or these comic books or these toys? I mean, essentially, it's just an item, right? And to like 99% of the world, everything in my room would be worthless junk to most people. But to a small select group of people, that know what the item is and know that it has a story associated with it that you can tell them, there's great value to be found there, right? So I really kind of look for those things. I look for rarity, nostalgic appeal, and some type of story attached to the item. And that's kind of like what I use to determine what type of things that I go for these days.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think, just sort of with the trends in general, it seems like storytelling, right? The provenance behind these items, like that's becoming so much more important these days. And, I know you do a really great job with it. And I always enjoy watching your social, when you've been going on these trips and all these cool things, like it's awesome to see and learn those stories about some of these items that you're finding. You've mentioned, obviously, our generation. You've mentioned, obviously, if someone walks into your room and sees this, it's a bunch of junk, but to our community, our group, it's really important. So you've had a lot of success building your communities. And I think that community is such an important part of this hobby and collectible space. Can you talk to us a little bit about, how you built up your own community and your self-proclaimed curator army, if you will?
Yes, sure. That's interesting. Not many people have ever asked me that. So that's cool that you actually recognize that. So, in the beginning, I came into the sports card hobby and I was part of that community. But then I kind of evolved my interest into things that I like a little bit more, like Marvel cards, for example, and then Star Wars cards, and then wrestling cards. And what I learned is that a couple years ago, these communities, right, were very segmented. They're like, you're a Marvel collector. That's it. You don't collect anything else. You're a wrestling collector. You're a Star Wars collector. You don't really cross over, right? They all have their own Facebook groups. They all have their own message boards that they communicate with each other and things like that. And sports cards too, right? Even sports cards have its own little, football cards or hockey cards or whatever, right? Vintage, modern, right? There's different segmented communities within all these spaces. And what I learned is that if you try to be part of any one of these communities, you can run into problems, right? If you don't conform to their rules, or you bring too much attention to certain cards that people are trying to keep for themselves or whatever, you can run into problems where they don't accept you and things like that. And I distinctly remember I tried to join this Marvel Facebook group, and I tried to do deals with people and things like that. And I was just getting really negative comments from these people, to the point where I was like, man, this is too toxic. I need to get out of here. And that's not just Marvel cards, but just even sports Facebook groups. I was having that problem. This was before Instagram really became a thing for me. So then I just kind of I said to myself, you know what? I'm just gonna do my own thing, right? I'm just gonna make my content, and anybody that follows me or anybody that wants to do deals with me, those are the people that I will interact with. I'm not gonna necessarily try to jump into these different communities and be part of what they're going, what they do. And I learned that basically from that, I was able to essentially play in different spaces where I probably should not have been. I was in the sports card community space but I was collecting Marvel cards and Star Wars cards, and I was exposing that to the sports card community. And some people loved it, some people really hated it, but I was doing it. And from that, I was starting to build relationships with people from these different communities. And and most of them were really cool people that were very open and accepting to me and who I interacted with on a daily basis. And I started to build a community around myself from that. So now, and I've just kind of continued to do that for the last 3 years. And what I realize is like, I feel like a lot of people try to like be part of these communities, but then they run into those same problems that I have. But for me, what I did is I just kind of built my own community of like-minded people. Like all the people, when I talk about like our generation from the 80s and 90s, that's like our people, right? We all love the same thing. We all love G.I. Joe, Transformers, Ninja Turtles. We all love 90s basketball, Jordan, Kobe, all those guys, or 80s basketball, Magic, Bird. You know, we all love the same things, right? But we might just be in different communities. So what I did is basically I made a bunch of like, broad content about all the things I love. And from that, I attracted a lot of people to my content. And I feel like because of that, we kind of created our own little community of mashup, different hobby stuff that we love.
Totally. Well, I think it's awesome, man. I mean, I found you early on YouTube and I've enjoyed watching that journey, and I think that you're starting to see it more and more. It's coming mainstream, to your point that you're not just a sports card collector, right? That you're into maybe also sneakers, but you're into pop culture, but you're into Marvel, but you're into comics, you're into magazines. Like that, I think is just sort of that collector evolution that we're talking about. People, get their dopamine hit on the one thing, right? And then continue to find new ways to feed that and expand their collection. That's really cool. You've done an amazing job building a community though. Yep, go ahead.
That too. I constantly get messages from people that are just random stuff. Like I'll get messages people that are just like all soccer card collectors, and I'm not a big soccer card collector, but they'll message me and say, you know what? I love your content because you show off different things. I get messages from like antique book collectors, coin collectors, every sport collector, every type of like niche thing. Even guys that collect cricket cards, they message me and say, hey, we love your content. It's always different and refreshing, and that's what I talk about when I say I'm building a community around myself. It's just like, you don't have to be part of any specific group to be able to enjoy the stuff that I'm showing off to people, right? Everybody can love this stuff. Totally.
Well, that's awesome. Well, like you said, you've done an impressive job of building your community. I want to shift focus a little bit into sort of more the business side of stuff. So, with building, you've built multiple businesses out of this passion for collecting. So can you tell us a little bit about sort of that journey and all the different things that you have going on within that?
For my hobby related stuff?
Yeah, for your hobby related stuff. Yep.
Yeah, sure. Just like, just a little bit of background, like basically in the beginning, just like everybody else, I kind of started off as like just a seller, like a flipper. Right. So that's why I kind of I started my Instagram page mainly out of necessity, just to circumvent eBay fees. Pretty much. I started off selling stuff on eBay and I was killing it. And then, I realized, okay, they're taking 13% off the top. Can I just do this myself? How can I do that? And, the only way that you can really do that is you have to have a social media presence where people can verify you and trust you to do deals off of eBay. So that's how I kind of started my Instagram. I started off as a kind of like just a online seller. And then I evolved into going to shows, card shows, trade shows, and being like a vendor at that. And then from there, I kind of evolved into being a content creator. And from my content, I got sponsorship deals and even more business opportunities from there. Then I kind of became an investor in the hobby space for certain companies. And I just recently started my own trading card company, Saturday Morning Cards. So there's a lot of different opportunities that I've been able to take advantage of within the hobby space.
I'm just curious about the journey. And so, you talked about how you went from the dealer flipper. Obviously, you created this great Curator personality and whole community around that. I know that you also have Between Two Slabs, and congratulations on Saturday Morning Cards. The first Steamboat Willie one was amazing, and you guys sold out, which is incredible. But again, I'm just curious about sort of how that's all come about.
Yes, what I realized is in the beginning, when I started making content, everything revolves around the content that I make, the brand that I've kind of created.
Mhm.
And what I realized in the beginning, like you gotta spend a lot of time making content. When I was making YouTube videos on a regular basis, you gotta shoot it, you gotta plan it, shoot it, edit it, and then post it out there. When I'm making my Instagram content, it's on a daily basis. And in the beginning, it's super fun. And anybody can do this. Anybody can be a content creator in the space, and they can just put their time towards it. And in the beginning, it's super fun because it's a creative outlet for a lot of people. And sometimes you'll get a lot of views, sometimes you won't, but you don't care because you're just having so much fun, right?
Mhm.
But at a certain point, just like anything in life, as a certain point when you start devoting so much time towards this one activity, you take time away from other things like your work responsibilities, your family, or the other hobbies or things like that, right? There's only so much time every day that you can allocate towards this one thing. Like social media content is what we're talking about right now. So you get to a point where you ask yourself, is this worth it? Is this the best use of my time? What am I getting out of this for me to dedicate or allocate so much of my time towards this activity? And then you have to kind of make a decision. Am I going to continue doing this as a hobby? In which case, maybe I should just kind of like prioritize my time with my other responsibilities. Or can I monetize this somehow where I can continue doing it, but it's still a good use of my time in comparison to whatever else I could be doing, like if I have a job or something, right? So I hit that wall where I had to make that decision. And, I decided I wanted to go for it. And that's when I really started to put the entrepreneur hat on versus the hobby hat. And I thought to myself, okay, if I'm going to be doing this activity within the hobby space, what type of like return on investment can I get from this? Can I monetize this? Can I do this or that? And from that, I was able to find different lanes that I could go through to kind of monetize my content and my brand to be able to kind of justify in my own mind all the time that I'm spending within the hobby.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And you've done a really good job at that. And obviously, with you being an entrepreneur, that helps, right? Because not everybody always, can put that hat on so easily. Sometimes it's a lot more difficult. So, I'd be curious, you'd mentioned sponsorships earlier. You've obviously talked about, you being an entrepreneur and growing these multiple different businesses. What marketing strategies sort of have worked for you? And do you have any sort of recommendations for helping grow either a small business in the space or, someone who's just starting?
Sure. I would say in the hobby space, things are still really, really undefined in terms of how we conduct business within the space. 3 years ago, when I got into this, is like 3-4 years ago, it was like we just making things up on the fly, right? Even if you were to do like a sponsorship or brand deal with a big company, that big company doesn't know how to deal with a social media content creator, right? Even when if I can reference your past companies, like they don't even know how to deal with a lot of people, right? We were just kind of figuring it out. So what I kind of learned is basically when I started doing this and when I started to kind of approach companies to do sponsorship deals and brand deals, I basically looked at what other people that were higher than me at that time were doing. And I thought to myself, it seems very scripted. It seems very inauthentic. It's like basically a few years ago, if you look at any of the old content a few years ago, whenever they did a sponsorship deal, they would make a commercial essentially.
Yeah.
And that's what most people would imagine, right? That like if you look at other industries, when you make content for a product or something, you make a commercial out of it. But the hobby is not very like commercialized in that way. The hobby is very, very down to earth, like people, in the trenches of card shows interacting with each other. It's real. It's really real. And if you're not authentic with your content, I feel like people just don't take you seriously. So I kind of, when I was getting approached by different companies to do, spots for them or advertise for them, I just didn't want to make a commercial, right? I just didn't want to be like seen as like, it's just another guy talking about this product. So I just kind of developed a new strategy where I kind of told them, instead of me making, one-off commercials for you and you paying me, $200-$300 or whatever it is for that one spot, what if I just become like a brand ambassador for you. And I feel like I'm one of the first people that kind of coined that idea and that term within the hobby, where I just told him, I said, look, give me a few months and just let me talk about your stuff through my daily content, through my Instagram content, on my weekly podcast, Between Two Slabs. Whenever I go to the shows every month, let me represent your brand. Let me wear your t-shirt or whatever. Let me use your products. Let me demo it to people. Let me just talk to people one-on-one, through my daily interactions about your stuff, and represent you guys that way, instead of making a one-off commercial that just plays at the beginning or end of my videos or whatever. Let me just do that, be a brand ambassador, because I had seen that in different markets. I saw that in like celebrities kind of do that with different products, where they just, always rep it. And then through that, people just kind of like view it as a common, normal thing when they see it all the time. So I kind of took that approach to it. And I started doing that with Slab Mags, was one of the first companies that I started to work with. From there, I kind of branched off to like Zion cases. I've worked with Mr. Minty, stand-up displays, Graded Guard, a bunch of other guys that I can't even remember right now, which is pretty bad, to be honest. But there's like a lot. There's a lot. But basically, I just kind of integrated all these different brands and companies and products and services into my daily content. And from that, I was able to find success that way. And I found that when I did it that way, not only was I able to promote these products or services, but I was also kind of still able to keep my personality, where people didn't think I was like just trying to do a commercial in front of them. And that's where I really found success. And that's kind of like been my whole thing. So even today, when people approach me and want me to do things with them, it's from a longer term brand ambassador perspective versus doing like a one-off pitch.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? And I think that, to your point and credit, I think your content comes across really authentic, right? And these are things that you use every day, because every time I see you in person, you've got Zion cases or Slab Mags or Graded Guards or the variety of other items you listed off, plus the many others you forgot because you didn't get paid millions of dollars to promote them, but that's okay. But I think that, again, that approach is a really good one. Build your audience and be authentic while you're doing it, and it will pay dividends, down the road. So I love that. Speaking of that, you were saying obviously how content has changed, how the hobby itself has changed. I'm curious, in the collectible market with changes over the years, how has that changed your business approach? Like, and how have you adapted to it? I know you've given some of that, but I'm curious if there's anything specific that you've like, hey, I've gone from doing this to doing this, and this has, worked really well for me.
Yeah, a few years ago when social media content or hobby content was really taking off and being a thing, it was, in my opinion, and I think a lot of people will agree, it was really like financially focused, right? Yeah. Like, you see all the content people are out there, you see the YouTube videos about like, oh, I made this $10,000 deal, or I spent $50,000 at this show, or this is how you can make money by flipping cards by doing these steps, right? It was really focused around money. And even my early content, if you look at my videos, it's like a lot of informational videos about how to navigate the hobby in terms of buying, selling, trading, all that stuff, right? I was doing the same thing, just like everybody else. But at a certain point, I kind of realized to myself, as like, I felt like that was not sustainable within the hobby in terms of just talking about the financial aspect of it all the time. Like, I study a lot of different financial investment markets, like real estate, stocks, things like that. And you'll see the same type of content out there from those people that claim to be like gurus. They will basically just continue to regurgitate the same basic like 5-10 principles on all their content all the time. And that might work in real estate or stocks or anything like that, but that doesn't really work in the hobby, from my opinion, because there's more of a collector focus around it. And the hobby just like, there's so many different cycles that it goes through constantly, that if you just continue to say the same things, this is how you buy a card, this is how you flip a card, and these are the top cards that you should buy, I feel like it gets stale. And I feel like for a certain period of time, like a year, 2 years ago, the hobby content was super stale in terms of everybody just talking about the same kind of stuff all the time, making the same type of videos about big deals and things like that. So I said, you know what? And again, I reached that point where I was telling myself, am I going to get any type of like return on this other than the fun that I'm having? Like, how can I monetize the time that I'm investing in this? Because I don't want to do that anymore. I was just tired of it. So then I just kind of said to myself, I'm just going to change the content that I'm doing. I'm going to make it more, we'll talk about big deals here and there, but I'm going to just talk about the things that I like to collect, right? And kind of pivot my content in terms of being more collector focused. And again, I think that, I feel like I was one of the first people that really kind of like put an emphasis on moving the hobby back into a collector focused space versus just a hobby hustle, no pun intended, make money type of space, right? Which is where everybody was at that time. I tried to shift it more towards being more collector focused because I just didn't see how all that turnaround that we were having, all that turnover in terms of like making money. I didn't see how that was sustainable given the market. And then shortly after that, the market started to like really, really go down where it would become harder to make content about making deals. It's hard to like tell people, oh, you can go out and make money doing this when the market's going down 20% every month, right? So I shifted away from that. I started making just more fun collector focused content and people really loved it and people loved the things that I was showing. And I just kind of like went in that direction. And then that kind of evolved into making content about different type of collectibles other than cards, toys, comic books, things like that. It's kind of grown into making like travel content now where I go to different places and show off different cultures and things like that. And even I'm sprinkling even like little food content in there, that people are enjoying. And I think that that's refreshing to a lot of people because it's not the same old, like, how to make money in the hobby anymore. It's a little bit different. And I think that's why I've been able to grow my followers because my content kind of stands out from everybody else's feed.
Yeah. Well, and I think, as the self-proclaimed, great curator, you have a responsibility to spread this wide umbrella and teach people about lots of things, Dan, which is awesome, which is really cool. So it's so encouraging to hear about all this success you had, but obviously, as we know, everything's not perfect all the time. So I guess I'm curious, is there like one or two challenges that stick out that you faced, from starting, whether it's, you're a great curator, brand and content, whether it's Saturday morning Saturday morning cards, not cartoons, although we love the Saturday morning cartoons. Like what, like I said, talk to us a little bit about maybe a challenge or two and how you've been able to overcome those.
Sure. I'll give you three challenges that just kind of pop up in my head. The first one I've kind of already talked about in terms of like trying to justify the amount of time that you spend in the hobby, right? Are you getting enough of a return on that? And I think a lot of people will face that challenge where they're just like, man, I love the hobby and I put 5 to 6 hours a day doing this, sometimes more, but I'm just not making enough to justify the cost of being in the hobby. That was a big challenge. And again, I had to kind of look at myself and tell myself, okay, if I'm going to devote so much of my time to the hobby, I better get some type of return from that. Otherwise, I'm doing a disservice to myself and my family by not putting my attention towards other higher priorities. So that's a challenge definitely a lot of people are going to face in the beginning. And when you get to that point, you just have to really like evaluate how you're spending your time in the hobby and whether you're able to be more efficient at monetizing that time. Like if you're going to trade shows every week, right? Or card shows every week setting up, but you're only making X amount of dollars and it's not enough. Do you have the right inventory to be selling at the shows, right? If you're flipping cards and, at the end of the day, if you're flipping and you're only making like 5% or 10%, are you flipping the right inventory? Are you buying at the right margins, right? Or if you're making content and you're not getting enough views, right? Or is the type of content that you're making appealing to the right type of audience that you're having for, right? So that's one challenge that a lot of people are going to face. The other challenge I think will be if you make social media content in the beginning, usually people are the community is very loving and encouraging because we're always rooting for like the new guy to come out there and become something. But inevitably you reach a certain point where suddenly there's going to be people that come out of nowhere that try to attack you and try to take you down for whatever reason. So you're gonna find challenges like that. And that can be really, really difficult for some people if you don't understand the context of social media in general. I remember When I first started this, I tried to make everybody happy. I tried to talk to everybody, reply to all comments, even negative comments where people were criticizing me. I tried to engage with them and just try to like reason with them. And at a certain point, you just realize that you can't make everybody happy, right? And you can't try to like please everybody with your content, because it makes you tiptoe around things. It makes you kind of walk on eggshells when you try to have it from that perspective. So then you kind of have to ignore it. And if you ignore it, or you try to like defend yourself, you can find yourself really subject to a lot of criticism. There have been people that have attacked me for crazy reasons. There are people that have dedicated entire Instagram pages and YouTube pages just to try to talk crap about me. And if you're not mentally strong to handle that type of criticism from strangers, then you're gonna get really messed up. And this is just in general too. This is not just in the hobby, but just in social media in general. If you let people that you don't know, strangers, basically try to get in your head and criticize you, you can go to a really dark place, to be honest. So that's going to happen to a lot of people, especially if you're in the content space. So what you have to do, what I did basically is I just had to like understand that a lot of what happens on social media is not real. Social media is not a real place like the real world is. There's other problems, other things that you have to deal with in the real world. So you just can't like let strange people, people that you don't know, affect how you think or how you act. That's a big challenge to people for sure. And then the other challenge that popped up in my head, which I just forgot because I went on a rant, so I forgot. But I'm sure it'll come back to me at some point. But those are the two biggest challenges. And again, your time and how you get a return on investment, and then social media and how it can really affect you.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think it's really important. Unfortunately, there's amazing people in this hobby. And going to shows and traveling the country and meeting all those people, connecting on social, building true amazing relationships. I mean, you and I, Dan, we've known each other for a long time, but we're social media hobby buddies, right? Like that's how we first connected, and it's been fun to grow that relationship over time. I've really enjoyed it. And I think that the one thing you do have to definitely keep in mind all the time is that while there are majority of good players, there's always the not so good. And obviously being, a keyboard warrior behind a phone or a computer is a lot easier to talk trash on people than it is to somebody's face. And I think it's important to bring up the mental health aspect, that social media isn't the end all be all, and that there is a real world. And if it gets to be too much for whatever reason, like it's cool, man. Unplug for a while. Nothing's going to change, and keep that positive focus on yourself. So I want to ask you about some sort of key qualities that you believe for being successful in the collectible space as an entrepreneur. It sounds like mental strength is obviously one of them. Is there any sort of other attribute or quality that you think that someone wanting to get into this space would need to sort of have in themselves?
To be in a social media space?
Just in general in the collectible space, whether that's entrepreneur looking to become a content creator or a dealer or start a completely new business that doesn't exist yet.
I would say there's two qualities that kind of apply to both. Like if you're just trying to be a reseller or a vendor or a flipper, or you're going to be a content creator, I think having the ability to spot trends within the hobby is very important, right? Like you could love one thing, like you could love vintage cards, for example, or vintage toys or comic books, but you got to be able to understand, what is going to be popular, because things change in the hobby very quickly. One day this player could be like the hottest thing ever, and then the next day it could be another guy, right? It just kind of depends on people's moods at the time and whatever stories or content or news is developing around any type of player or character. So you got to be able to trend spot for sure. And one thing that I love to do is I like to look for different forms of collectibles that have not been really given the proper exposure. Like a year ago, nobody was really talking about like type 1 photos, right? They were around, but they didn't really take off like they have now, or different types of cards. A couple years ago, I told people about Marvel PMGs, right? Which was like a big thing, right? And I got a lot of criticism for that, but that was a thing. It had its moment. And then after that, it was like Star Wars Superfractors, And then after that, it was a couple other things. And now it's like type photos. And, one thing that I believe is going to be really popular someday is like graded toys is going to be a thing, or original comic book art or graded music items, right? So being able to spot these trends early and being able to get in there before there's the spike and the FOMO buying and all that stuff, that's really key. And then the other part of it is being consistent. Being consistent with your activity, whether you're a content creator and you're making content every day, or whether you're trying to do this as a business and trying to resell things, you've got to be consistent so that you can grow a following of people that will support you and gain a reputation and gain the experience and stay up to date on all the trends.
I think those are amazing qualities for people. And I agree with you on all of that. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate our time together. I don't want to take up too much of your time because you've given us a lot, but sort of before we wrap this up, you've given a ton of advice and tips to our audience, but I'm wondering if there's one last sort of golden nugget that you could give to aspiring collectors and entrepreneurs that you leave them with the great Curator golden nugget of advice.
Oh, wow. Put me on the spot, huh? Giving them one piece of really great advice. I would say for me, and this is going to be very broad lesson that I try to impart to your listeners here, but I would say accountability within the hobby space is very, very important, because there's definitely people that will try to push this narrative where they say that if you follow this person and you listen to their advice and you make this purchase or whatever, and you lose money, it's that person's fault, right? Because they gave you bad advice or whatever. Okay, that's a very common thread within the hobby for the last few years. And what it comes down to is that, if you take that position where you blame people for your decisions, then you will never learn. You'll just make that same you'll make that same mistake in the future, or you'll have like a crutch where you can just blame people for your mistakes. And I feel like a lot of people that take that position, they just don't realize that if they are just accountable to their own decisions within the hobby space, whether they make a bad buy, whether they make a bad decision about something that they've done within the hobby space, maybe they did a deal and it looked poorly on them or something like that, or they bought the wrong item, or they just treated somebody the wrong way for whatever reason, you have to be accountable to that. And if you are accountable, not only will you learn from it, but if it becomes if you're criticized for it, then I feel like people will be very forgiving to you if you are accountable and take responsibility for your actions. So that's probably the biggest lesson that I would impart to anybody, is just be accountable for everything that you do within the hobby space. And just by perseverance and consistency with your activity, you will evolve from any mistakes that you make into a better version of yourself.
I think that's awesome. And I think there's a couple things in there too. One that I will take away is to be true to yourself and trust your gut, right? Because I think a lot of times, like you said, you're getting into all these different collectibles and things, and you're finding things that you're like, I know that's special to me. And because it's special to you, it's most likely going to be special to somebody else. And, the FOMO thing, just continue to stay on your path. And I think you'll do okay, because I've been guilty of it. And I'm sure everybody's been guilty of it in the space. Like, you sell something too early, or you don't trust your gut and you get rid of it. And you're just like, oh man, I wish I still had that, or I wish I held on to it. And then the accountability thing is big too, right? Not only from the way in which you described it, but also the way in which you treat other people. This community is all about, having awesome people around us. And it's like, you do one sort of sketchy, weird thing and people will remember that, and that's going to come back to get you. So I think that's the accountability thing's awesome thing. Cool. Well, before I let you go, Dan, I want to see, do you have any sort of exciting upcoming projects or events that you want to share with the audience a little bit?
Yeah, we kind of talked about this a little bit in the beginning, but my newest venture within the hobby space is I started my own card company. It's called Saturday Morning Cards, and that's really where I'm putting all my effort and focus into right now. I'm trying to transition away from being a show vendor to focusing on this. I'm still making my content. That's a real big part of it, but all my energy and focus is going into Saturday Morning Cards right now. And if I could just give my quick 30-second elevator pitch here for those people who are not familiar with it, is basically at Saturday Morning Cards, we make limited edition collectible what I describe as mini art prints in the form of a single card inside a blind box format. I've basically taken all the aspects of the trading card hobby that we love, chrome designs, numbered, limited editions, and basically combined it with the IPs of our childhood from the 80s, 90s, early 2000s that have been overlooked or underutilized within the hobby space for decades. So we're going to be making cards of all the stuff that we loved growing up as kids in a format that we as card collectors understand. And we price it at a very affordable price point of $30 per box, which is very affordable compared to everything else in the hobby. We did it purposely because we wanted to make this available for anybody that wanted to collect it, regardless of where you are in the hobby, whether you're a casual entry-level collector or whether you're a seasoned professional collector. This is a price point that everybody can access it. And we're very excited. You know, our first release was Steamboat Willie, sold out completely in under 2 weeks. We have our next release planned in a few weeks, depending on when you air this episode. And we have releases planned out for the next 12 months. So it's definitely an exciting time, and I'm hoping that I can build this into something where, you know, people really enjoy it, and then, you know, we get to collect all the fun stuff that we haven't had access to for decades.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I have it back on my collectible shelf back there. I've got the Steamboat Willie. I should have brought it up. I didn't think about that. That's on me. But it's beautiful. The card in hand is spectacular. You've got a ton of cool designs. Unfortunately, you said it's sold out, but I did see some pop up on eBay. But definitely check out, guys, SaturdayMorningCards.com or on social at Saturday Morning Cards. Dan, you can also be found on Instagram at the.great.curator, which I have these up on the screen for the audience. But you and your partner Mo have been crushing it with Saturday Morning Cards, and I cannot wait to see sort of what's in store and upcoming. So just, I know you said in a few weeks, like, is that, like, what give us sort of dates or anything? Do you have any dates, or that's still up in the air as far as when that drop's going to happen?
Pending receiving our items and assembly and everything like that, probably end of June is what we're looking at, you know, for our next release. And we're going to try to, like, you know, originally when we did this, we thought we would do a release every quarter, you know, because we didn't think there was going to be, you know, a lot of demand. But because there was so much demand and the first release sold out so quickly, we had to, you know, expedite our plans and condense everything from one release every quarter to now we're trying to do a release every month. So, you know, we had to figure, there were some logistical issues with that and some scaling issues that we had to kind of figure out, which we're still working on, but we're hoping to get one out in June, and then we're hoping to get the next one out in July. And then after those next two releases, I think we'll have figured out the logistical aspect of planning for a release every month. And then we'll be ready for that. I can't tell you that I'll give you a little bonus Easter egg for the people that have hung out this time. I'm very excited to include in the next releases that we will have sketch cards, which is
awesome.
The artists that I've included in these, they're incredible artists, and I've already sent out the sketch cards to them to get to be made and created. So I'm super excited to get those back. And then when I do, I'll show them off to everybody on social media. But that's going to be our next big thing that we're going to have as a chase aspect in the next couple releases.
That's awesome. That's so cool. And the level of professionalism you guys are bringing to these really just takes it to that next level. And like I said, just super impressed, and can't congratulate you and Mo enough on the success there. And then obviously on everything else that's happened over the years. So this has been awesome, Dan. I cannot thank you enough for taking time to meet with myself and talk to the audience and share some of your knowledge and your journey. So I just want to say thank you so much for being on Hobby Hustle, man.
Appreciate it. Thank you. I'll come back anytime.
Thanks, man. We'll definitely have to get you back, and we'll talk some specifics on all these different niches you're into. So I appreciate you. I hope you have a great day. Everyone watching, thank you for your time. I hope you learned something new or found some inspiration. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to like, subscribe, and of course, share with your friends. And remember, keep collecting, keep hustling, and we'll see you next week on Hobby Hustle, where collecting passion and business collide.
Hobby Hustle is brought to you by Collector Creative. If you're a collectible brand or company looking for help with marketing, branding, design, or development, head over to collectorcreative.com and drop Zach a line. We'll be back next week. In the meantime, connect with us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at collector_creative. And be sure to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'll see you next time on Hobby Hustle, where collecting passion and business collide.